Have you ever wondered how much a life is worth in the eyes of someone who claims to love you? I used to think that family meant unconditional support, that no matter how fractured relationships became, blood would still bind us when it truly mattered. I believed that when everything else failed, family would show up. Until the night I stood outside a mansion, holding my son's medical records in one hand and my pride in the other, begging a woman who once called me sister to help save his life. She was throwing a $500,000 luxury baby shower that weekend. Her response was as elegant as it was cold. "It's not a good time. We have too many eyes on us." That night, I realized the harshest betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people who share your last name and still choose to turn their backs. My name is Lena Harper. I'm a mother, an architect, and a woman who has built everything I have with nothing but grit, patience, and quiet resilience. This is the story of how I lost the last illusions I had about family, and how, when they came crawling back, I was the one setting the terms. I wasn't born into wealth, but I grew up with just enough comfort to believe we were doing better than we were. My family had always existed in a strange space between modest reality and curated illusion. My parents worked regular jobs, my father as a civil engineer, my mother a school administrator, but they were meticulous about appearances. New cars every few years, holiday cards photographed by professionals, clothes chosen to suggest a lifestyle just slightly beyond our reach. I used to think they were aspirational. Now I realize they were performing. I was the older child, the structured one. I kept to my routines, got good grades, helped out when asked. My younger brother Grant was different. Charming, expressive, always knowing what to say to win people over. Where I was deliberate, he was effortless. He breezed through high school with more social capital than academic interest, but people liked him. And in our family, that was what mattered most. I went on to study architecture at the University of Oregon. While other students partied, I took freelance drafting jobs to afford my rent. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to build something that mattered. I believed that if I worked hard enough, earned my way to something tangible, maybe my family would see me differently. Not just as the responsible one who didn't need help, but as someone they could be proud of. Someone worthy of celebration. When Grant met Celeste Rowan, our family dynamic shifted in ways I could never have predicted. She wasn't just wealthy, she was born into a different dimension. The Rowan name was practically stitched into the fabric of upscale life. Luxury textiles, exclusive showrooms, a fashion empire that dated back 3 generations. Celeste, though, wasn't just a passive heiress. She had turned her inheritance into a modern lifestyle brand with millions of followers. Think curated tablescapes, minimalist nurseries, and soundbites about intentional living. She was the type of woman people followed not because they related to her, but because they wanted to be her. Celeste had presence. Everything about her was manicured, from her tone of voice to the slight, well-timed tilt of her head when listening. She and Grant met at a fundraising gala. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The wedding was held on a vineyard estate in California, with a private performance from a pop artist I'd only heard on commercials. I was invited, but I wasn't included. I spent most of the evening answering logistical questions from relatives, who assumed I'd volunteered to help manage the flow of guests. No one asked about my studio. No one asked about Noah. After they married, Grant seemed absorbed into her orbit. They bought a home in the hills overlooking the city, mid-century. Modern, fully restored. Celeste turned it into a content machine. Weekly photo shoots, dinner parties with influencers, even a series of branded videos on sustainable entertaining, sponsored by high-end homeware lines. My parents were starstruck. They started referring to Grant and Celeste as the power couple. My father joked about retiring early to let them take care of things. My mother mirrored Celeste's mannerisms without even realizing it. I never felt directly antagonized. I was just edited out. Quietly, systematically. My accomplishments were acknowledged, never celebrated. When I signed the lease for my first design office, my mother responded with a vague, "That's great, honey," before pivoting to talk about Celeste's upcoming feature in a luxury lifestyle magazine. It wasn't hatred. It was hierarchy. And I was not at the top. Still, I kept my distance without bitterness. I had Noah, and I had my work. I had early mornings sketching ideas for a new client before making pancakes with him while he sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor with his coloring books. I had late nights drafting plans for a community center while he slept nearby, his breathing steady, his hand curled around his stuffed fox. I wasn't lonely. I just knew where I stood. Noah, in his quiet way, understood it too. He never asked why he didn't get the same attention as his cousin, the one Celeste was now pregnant with and already featuring in monogrammed onesies on her social feeds. But he noticed. Children always do. Once, after we left a family brunch, where Celeste had spent 20 minutes narrating her birth plan while I sat silently beside an untouched scone, Noah asked, "Mom, do we have to go next time?" I didn't answer right away. I just squeezed his hand and said, "Only if we want to." That was the shape of our life, beautiful in its own way, if a little separate. And that separation was manageable, until the day everything changed. Until the moment I received news that made the distance between us feel like a canyon. Because when my son's life was on the line, I learned exactly how far apart our worlds truly were. I never expected life to be easy, but I had always trusted that, if I worked hard and stayed consistent, I could carve out a life with dignity. That belief carried me through the early years of Harperform, the design studio I founded from a borrowed desk in a shared office with flickering lights and paper-thin walls. There were days I'd leave a client meeting, change in the parking lot, and head straight to Noah's school recital with sawdust still on my shoes. I took pride in being hands-on, both as a mother and a designer. I wasn't interested in glamour. I was interested in control, not in the domineering sense, but in the quiet, essential kind. Control meant being able to provide, to protect, to make choices. The studio grew slowly but meaningfully. Clients returned. They referred others. I found a rhythm that, while exhausting, made sense. Noah and I had routines: library Fridays, pancake Saturdays, and a Sunday walk through the neighborhood arboretum. We didn't have much in the way of luxury, but our life had a richness that Celeste, with all her linen curtains and imported fruit baskets, would never understand. Still, money was always tight. Portland wasn't a cheap city, and while I had a few solid contracts, they were modest. I reinvested every dollar I could back into the business. A better computer, updated software licenses, upgraded rendering tools. Health insurance was one of the few corners I cut. I had coverage, yes, but the kind that made you flinch before every doctor's visit. It covered the basics, but anything more serious meant out-of-pocket costs that could gut my savings. It was a calculated risk I took because I didn't think I had a choice. Ray, my partner in the studio, and one of the few people who knew how much I was juggling, warned me more than once. "Lena, you can't keep bootstrapping your health plan. What if something happens?" I would nod, promise to look into it next quarter, and then get pulled back into some urgent project deadline. There was always something that felt more immediate. Until, of course, the thing you never planned for arrives without knocking. Noah had always been a strong kid. Despite his heart condition, he lived fully, climbing, running, drawing elaborate cities with chalk on the sidewalk. His doctors were optimistic. We had checkups scheduled regularly. His energy never flagged, not really. So when he came home from a school field trip looking tired, I thought it was just the autumn cold. Kids pick things up. I gave him tea, tucked him in early, and promised a lazy Saturday with cartoons and his favorite cereal. But the next morning, he couldn't stand up without help. His hands were cold. His skin looked pale and dull, like the color had drained from him overnight. I rushed him to the nearest hospital. What followed was a blur of scans, blood work, and consultations. I sat beside him in the pediatric ward, trying to read his favorite dinosaur book aloud while my voice cracked. The doctors were kind but serious. They told me the condition had worsened. A rare tear in the valve, undetected until now, likely. Exacerbated by a growth spurt. He needed surgery, urgently, within days. And the estimate, even with minimal insurance coverage, was staggering. I remember staring at the printed cost breakdown, not really seeing the numbers. My brain went into survival mode. I started calculating assets, my car, my emergency fund, the small investment account I'd opened years ago and barely touched. I could sell equipment, delay payroll, call in every favor I'd ever earned. I could empty every corner of my life and maybe come up with half. I didn't want to ask for help. I never had. But that day, sitting in a folding chair next to a hospital bed covered in cartoon-printed sheets, watching my son sleep with an IV in his arm, I realized pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. So I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I picked up my phone, scrolled to a contact I never used, and pressed the call button. Celeste answered on the second ring. Her voice was light, like it always was when she was in performance mode. I could tell instantly that she wasn't alone. There was ambient music in the background, a kind of soft jazz overlay that I recognized from one of her brand collaborations. And then the laughter, gentle and staged, the kind you hear at curated brunches. "Lena," she said, drawing out the second syllable like a stretch of silk. "This is a surprise. Everything okay?" I took a breath and tried to make my voice sound composed, but the desperation clung to every word. I told her everything in a controlled rush. Noah's sudden collapse, the diagnosis, the urgent surgery, the $120,000 cost, the insurance limitations. I didn't cry. I wasn't trying to manipulate. I just wanted her to understand the gravity. I asked simply if she and Grant could help with part of the cost. Alone, just enough to close the gap. There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then she said slowly, "Oh, Lena, that's just really unfortunate timing." Unfortunate timing. I stood in a hospital corridor where the air smelled like antiseptic and fear, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers went numb, and that was what she offered me. "I'm in the middle of planning the baby shower," she continued, almost apologetically. "It's a whole campaign. We've got brand partners involved. There's a drone videographer, custom gift curation, a French patisserie flying in pastries. The funds are already allocated, and moving anything around now it would compromise a lot. I'm not asking for your brand," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I'm asking for your help. This is life or death, Celeste." "I understand," she said softly. "And I'm truly sorry. But you have to see it from my side, too. We're under a lot of visibility right now. This is a big moment for Grant and me. If I redirect that much money, it might raise questions, especially with the financial disclosures tied to our sponsorships. It's not personal. It's just not a good time. Not a good time." I didn't respond. I just ended the call. I couldn't speak. My mouth moved, but no sound came out. I remember turning to look at the vending machine across the hall and focusing on the colors of the snack packaging, willing myself not to cry. Over the next 2 days, I tried every avenue. I contacted my bank, pitched a rushed equity offer on my business to a local investor I barely knew, even considered taking out a predatory, high-interest loan. Every door either closed or came with a price too high to consider. Ray was by my side, helping where she could, contacting her own network, updating clients, managing the studio's projects. But time was slipping, and the surgery window was narrowing. On the third morning, I made the hardest decision of all. I went to see them, I didn't tell them I was coming. I just showed up. Celeste and Grant lived in a gated community in the West Hills. Their home looked like a lifestyle magazine spread. Glass facade, manicured lawn, imported trees, and lighting that made it glow like a boutique hotel. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the rows of catering vans and florists unloading boxes. It was the day of the baby shower. I walked to the front door, gripping Noah's medical file like a lifeline. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a conversation, maybe a private room where we could speak honestly. What I got was a room full of people wearing pastel designer outfits, sipping rosewater cocktails, and posing for staged photos in front of a custom balloon arch that spelled out Baby Rowan. Celeste spotted me the moment I entered. Her face barely flickered. She walked over, a flute of sparkling juice in her hand, and said under her breath, "Lena, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," I said. "Privately." She glanced around the room, scanning for cameras or guests within earshot. "This isn't the time." "There is no other time," I said. "Please, just 5 minutes." She hesitated, then led me to the back patio, where a floral arch had been arranged for photo ops. The smell of lavender hung thick in the air. Handed her the folder. She didn't open it. "Celeste, this is real. I'm not here to ruin your party. I just need help. Noah needs help." She glanced at the crowd behind her, then looked back at me, her voice low and tight. "Do you know how this looks? If people see us talking like this, if they find out what it's about, the narrative spins. Sponsors might back out. Our brand is tied to image, Lena. We can't afford a messy headline." I stared at her, stunned. A child might die. My son might die. "And you're talking about headlines?" She stepped back, composed. "This isn't fair, Lena. We didn't choose this situation, and we're not responsible for fixing it. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Please don't make a scene." Something in me cracked then. Not loud. Quietly, silently. Like ice breaking beneath the surface. I turned around, walked through the crowd, and left the mansion without another word. That night, I sat beside Noah in the hospital, watching the rise and fall of his chest, the gentle beep of machines reminding me he was still here, still fighting. I made a promise to him that night, and to myself. If my family couldn't save him, I would, even if I had to tear my life apart to do it. In the days that followed, I operated on adrenaline and the quiet determination that only desperation can sharpen. I didn't cry anymore. Not because I wasn't overwhelmed, but because I couldn't afford the collapse. Noah needed me alert, decisive, composed. While he lay in a hospital bed surrounded by wires and monitors, I became a one-woman operation, fundraiser, negotiator, strategist, and mother. Ray stayed with me every step of the way. She slept on the vinyl bench in Noah's room, made calls in the hallway, emailed contacts at 2 a.m. without waiting for my permission. She told me early on, "You built something real, Lena. People see that. They'll show up. You're not as alone as you think." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. The fundraiser she launched slowly began to gain traction. At first, it was small. Former clients donated $50, $100, sometimes more. A couple I had designed a nursery for 2 years. Ago wrote a note with their $200 contribution. "You made our home feel safe. Now it's our turn." Then came a surge I never expected. My former intern, Kelly, now working for an architectural nonprofit in D.C., reached out. "We've got a medical assistance grant," she said. "It's meant for staff emergencies, but I think we can make a case for this." I'm pushing it through. A week prior, I hadn't even remembered she was on my email list. Now, she was finding loopholes in federal documentation to try to save my child. Even people I barely knew stepped forward. A neighbor from 2 doors down came by with a check for $500 and a shy smile. "You always helped shovel the sidewalk without asking. Figured I could return the favor." I was stunned, not just by the generosity, but by the fact that it was coming from places where no obligation existed. The people with the most resources had turned away, but the people with the least? They gave without hesitation. 3 days in, we'd raised nearly $40,000. That was enough to get the hospital to schedule a surgery date. They agreed to move forward, provided we signed onto a strict repayment agreement for the remainder. I didn't care. I would have signed anything. Ray handled most of the logistics. I focused on Noah. I stayed up every night next to his bed, reading stories he'd long memorized just to hear him laugh, even weakly. When his eyes flickered open one morning, his voice was quiet but certain. "Mom, am I gonna be okay?" I didn't lie. "Yes," I said, "because we're not giving up." The day before the operation, Matt and June Carter showed up at the hospital. They were Noah's paternal grandparents, my ex's parents, people I hadn't spoken to much in recent years. The divorce had been clean but distant. Still, they walked in that afternoon with weary eyes and arms full of grocery bags and blankets. "We sold the cabin," June said gently. "It wasn't being used anymore. We figured the money could help." Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $25,000. I stared at it, speechless. Matt, a man who had never said more than 2 sentences at family dinners, looked at me and said, "He's our grandson. That's all that matters." It was one of the few times in my life I felt something give way inside me, some internal knot loosening. These weren't people who owed me anything, but they gave anyway, not because they had to, because they loved Noah. We were still short nearly $30,000. I considered everything, from selling my equipment to dissolving my business. Ray stopped me. "We're almost there," she said. "Don't burn down what you've built. Let people help." I hesitated. But then, one evening, I received an email that shifted everything. Subject: saw the fundraiser. "I want to help." It was from Tasha, Celeste's former assistant. She had worked for Celeste for 3 years before being let go in what Celeste had called a creative transition. We had only met once, at a holiday party, where she'd complimented my shoes and apologized for the cold hors d'oeuvres. Now, she was offering a $10,000 donation from her own savings. In her note, she wrote, "I stayed quiet for a long time because I needed the job. But I saw what she did to you. I was in the room when she refused. It haunted me. This money isn't much, but it's what I have. For Noah," I cried then, not for the money, but for the truth in that message, for someone finally acknowledging what had happened. The final breakthrough came when one of Ray's articles, detailing our story without naming names, got picked up by a regional lifestyle blog. They ran the piece with the headline, "Architect Mom's Race Against Time to Save Her Son." It was raw and personal and deeply human. Within 24 hours, a quiet storm followed. Donations flooded in. Local news wanted interviews. Messages poured in from strangers, parents who had gone through similar situations, people who had felt abandoned by their own families, individuals who had little to give but gave anyway. We reached the goal 3 days before the surgery. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something better. Grounded. Noah had a chance because people who didn't owe me anything showed up. Because kindness, when it's real, doesn't ask for a spotlight. On the morning of the surgery, I kissed Noah's forehead and whispered, "Look how many people love you, kiddo. You're going to be okay." He gave a sleepy nod, and I stood in that hallway with Ray at my side, knowing one thing with complete certainty: family wasn't blood. It was action. It was choice. And in those darkest days, I had found mine. The surgery took nearly 7 hours. Each minute passed like a year. And every time a doctor walked through the corridor, I braced myself as though gravity itself might shift. Ray and June sat with me through it all. Nobody said much, just the occasional squeeze of a hand, the silent offering of a cup of tea, the stillness of solidarity. I clutched a small handmade bracelet Noah had given me months earlier, beads, strung together with mismatched letters that spelled Best Mom. I held on to it like a lifeline. When the surgeon finally came out, he looked tired but calm. He gave a small nod, the kind you don't realize you've been waiting for until your entire body unclenches. "The surgery was a success," he said. "Noah's strong. He's going to be okay." The relief didn't come in a wave. It came, like a quiet exhale after holding your breath for too long. I walked back into Noah's room, kissed his forehead, and for the first time in weeks, I let my body collapse into the chair beside him. Not from grief or fear, but from a fragile, beautiful hope. Recovery took time, but with each day, color returned to Noah's cheeks. His laughter slowly crept back, cautious at first, then full and free like it used to be. The night he asked for pancakes, I cried over the stove. Not because they were burnt, but because they were asked for. As Noah healed, so did something. In me? Not in the way that suggests everything was fixed, but in the way that finally allows you to stop fighting ghosts. I returned to work slowly, taking on a few smaller projects to keep the studio alive while Ray ran operations. She refused to take a salary for 2 months, even when I protested. "You've earned this, Lena," she said. "Let people show up for you. You've been doing it alone for too long." We received more requests than expected. Clients, drawn to the authenticity of our story, wanted to work with us, not out of pity, but respect. One, a developer working on a low-income housing initiative, reached out after reading about us online. She said, "I don't just want pretty spaces. I want places that mean something, that feel like someone built them with care. That's what you do." Within a year, Harper signed its largest contract to date, a sustainable housing development in the southeast quarter of Portland. It was worth over $2 million. We expanded our team, hired interns, moved into a real office space with real walls and real sunlight. But it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about voice, about being heard, seen. Finally, when I was invited to give a TEDx talk on spaces that heal, I stood on that stage, hands slightly trembling, and told the story not of my professional milestones, but of a hospital room, of a child's breath, of the people who showed up when others didn't. The video went viral. Not the kind of viral that's flashy and empty, but the kind that makes people write to you. Letters from other mothers who had begged for help and been told, "Not a good time." Messages from people who had once felt small, forgotten, invisible, now reminding themselves that strength can grow quietly in the background, waiting for its moment. But perhaps the most unexpected moment came 6 months later, when a producer from a national talk show reached out. They were doing a segment called Modern Heroes and wanted me to share my story. I hesitated, worried about exposure, worried about reliving too much. But then I thought about all the people who had carried us across the finish line, the ones whose names I'd written in a notebook I kept in my nightstand, people who had no spotlight but had saved a life. So I agreed. The interview was candid. I spoke about Noah, about the kindness of strangers, about the silence of family. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The truth speaks clearly when told without theatrics. After it aired, something shifted. News outlets began connecting dots. People online did what they do best: research. They figured out who I was, who my brother was, who his wife was. Articles started circulating. Headlines followed. Socialite refused to help dying nephew. Now her sister-in-law is a rising star in design. She threw a $500K baby shower while her nephew fought to live. Celeste's pristine brand began to crack. One by one, sponsors pulled out. A wellness product line she was launching was quietly shelved. Her content began drawing critical comments. She issued no response, just silence, curated as always. I didn't rejoice. I didn't celebrate. That's not who I am. But I watched it unfold with a calm awareness that justice sometimes takes its time, but it doesn't forget. And the most powerful kind doesn't need revenge, it only needs truth. One evening, I found Noah painting in the corner of our living room, the walls bright with morning sun. He looked up at me and said, "You're not just the best mom. You're also the bravest." I smiled. Not because I believed I was brave, but because in that moment, I didn't need to be anything else. I was enough. For him, for me, for the life we were finally building on our own terms. And that was the only redemption I ever needed. It wasn't long before the past came knocking. A week after the interview aired, my assistant buzzed me in, the middle of a design meeting. Her voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's family. She didn't have an appointment, but she's waiting in the lobby." I didn't need to ask who. "Celeste." I walked out to find her seated in one of the low chairs by the reception desk, her posture perfect as always, but her expression noticeably cracked. She wasn't wearing her usual sculpted elegance. No camera-ready makeup. Just a camel coat, oversized sunglasses, and the smallest handbag I had ever seen her carry. When she stood, I could see the effort it took to smile. "Lena," she said, softly. "Do you have a few minutes?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply turned and walked toward the glass conference room. She followed. Inside, I sat down, but didn't offer her a seat. She took one anyway. Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her bag. That, more than anything, told me she was nervous. She never fidgeted. "I wanted to speak with you directly," she began. "There's been fallout from everything. I know you didn't name us. I know that. But people talk. The story's out. Grant's been dropped from 2 of his real estate deals. Our accounts are frozen. Sponsors—" I held up a hand. "Stop. I know why you're here. Just tell me what you want." She swallowed. "We need help. We're selling the house. But there are legal fees, penalties. The bank is moving fast. I just need enough to stabilize things. Just a bridge, Lena. A few months. I'll pay you back. I swear." I looked at her. This woman who once told me it was not a good time when my child was about to die. The woman who had spoken those words with a flute of sparkling cider in one hand and a sponsorship contract in the other. And now, here she was, sitting in front of me, asking for mercy with the same mouth that had dismissed me. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch, thick and undeniable. Then I stood, walked to the small safe we kept in the corner of the room, and pulled out a sealed envelope. I handed it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a check. Enough to cover what she needed. More than she expected. She looked up, stunned. "Thank you. I didn't think you'd—" I cut her off. "This isn't forgiveness." She blinked. "Then what is it?" "It's closure," I said. "This is me showing up the way you never did. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. Because my son will never see me turn away from someone in pain, even someone who did. And because I refuse to become the person you once were." Celeste's eyes welled up, but I didn't care for her tears. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't moved. I was done. "I'm giving you this with one condition," I continued. "After you cash that check, we are finished. No contact, no letters, no visits. You go your way, and I go mine." She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg. I didn't give her the chance. "You had one chance to be family," I said, voice steady. "You chose your brand instead. This is your second chance, but only to leave with dignity." She nodded slowly, tears now falling. and walked out of the room with the envelope clutched to her chest like it weighed more than it ever had. And just like that, she was gone. I returned to my office, closed the door, and looked out over the city. Didn't feel victory. I didn't feel revenge. I felt peace, and after everything, that was more than enough. Some stories don't end with fireworks or dramatic confrontation. Some end quietly, in a well-lit office, with a signature on a check and a door that closes, for the final time. I didn't share this journey to point fingers or chase sympathy. I shared it because I know I'm not alone. There are thousands of people out there who have been let down by the very people they trusted most, who've been told that loyalty is a one-way street, that love must always be earned, or that silence is strength. But here's the truth. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to walk away from those who abandon you, no matter what last name you share. And you have the right to rebuild, on your own terms, with people who choose you, not because they have to, but because they want to. What would you do if someone who once rejected you came back asking for help? Would you offer a hand or protect your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, tap the like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and send this to someone who needs to be reminded that healing is possible.